lot of moves in order to revolutionize Nigeria's health system by strengthening the health insurance coverage throughout the whole nation. And
all right.
Yeah. And again,
Prof, thank you so much.
The problem here is that we are trying to strengthen health facilities. Where are the medical personnel that will manage these facilities? Greener pastures has attracted all those medical facilities. Japa syndrome is another aspect. Now, the bottom line there is that government needs to pay attention to human capital development in order to attract foreign investors.
Very, very important, very, very important suggestions there, Professor Olarwaju. Thank you so much for that. Highlighting spending for education and healthcare, really critical sectors. Definitely, we've seen that some governments are struggling with revenue at this time. They've had to cut spending, on those segments. But definitely, that is a bad move right there. But thank you so much, Prof, for highlighting all of that. Definitely a very interesting session there. I'm going to hand things over now. I'm going to take a pause right now and hand over to Faith Dafe, and she's going to be handling the next panel now. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Ladi, for that interesting session, and of course, all the panelists that have contributed so far. Because of time, we're just going to dive right in. I'm going to be talking with Mr. Tokwe Fashua, Mrs. Hawa Mustafa, Professor Ogunlano Olarewaju Fatai, Dr. Muda Yusuf, Ms. Olusegun Zacchaeus, and Dr. Olusegun Omishaki during this session. And we're going to be focusing mostly, of course, on human capital development of investments and what is happening with labor. So on that note, I'm going to quickly get to Mr. Tokwe Fashua now because we're talking about the issue of the minimum wage. We know that the Minimum Wage Review Act specifies that this happens every 5 years, and that expired in April. So we already are behind time when you talk about, the issue of the minimum wage review. And we have had different conversations going on there, whether it is with government. There's a tripartite committee, of course, we know that, the organized private sector, labor, and we know that there's some sort of stalemate. The president met with labor unions last week. There's going to be a further meeting next week. So I'm just going to dive into the question right away. Let's talk about the issue of setting a new minimum wage. This is directed to Mr. Tokwe Fashua. What are your thoughts, on this debate of setting a new minimum wage? And does this present an opportunity for the federal government to link wages to productivity and drive reforms? I'd like to hear from you on that, Mr. Fashua.
Well, thank you very much, Faith. It's good to see you once again. And basically, well, quick one. Ordinarily speaking, there's a negotiation taking place, and because I work in government, I try not to color that negotiation. Because it could be dangerous. I think that gets into a certain point where there'll be an agreement, and I see that the president is also ready to make concessions as well, because everybody knows, when you do the kind of very profound reforms that we have done, then of course the wage curve will shift outwards. Everybody needs to earn a little bit more. I am a little bit more on the side of the most vulnerable and the poorest people in society. The idea behind minimum wage is to say, look, let's set a benchmark below which nobody will pay, and below which it becomes illegal when you say you're employing somebody. For example, now, if you're employing anyone full-time in Nigeria, you're paying them 20,000, it's actually illegal because the minimum wage is supposed to be 30,000. A lot of issues then come up. Should we have the same minimum wage in expensive Lagos, expensive Port Harcourt, expensive Yenagoa or Abuja, compared with places like maybe Kebbi, which is not so expensive. Maybe places like Ondo State, where I'm from, not particularly very expensive, and so on. Places like Lokoja, Kogi is actually quite expensive for some reasons. So, that comes up. The second thing is that you're now thinking about should we actually begin to move towards a scenario where people get paid per hour so that we can target productivity? Yes, however, you cannot have that discussion in a rancorous atmosphere. When you want to have that kind of profound discussion, which is going to change the way we think about work, you need everybody to be together in terms of their thinking. And this brings me to some of the points that some of the other speakers have raised. For example, Dr. Michakin talks about jobs and jobless growth. The thing we should be thinking about now is how the world of work and employment has changed globally, and that AI is coming for all of us. And when AI comes, there's going to be fewer kind of, low quality jobs that are already being taken out now by machines and being done much more. Any repetitive work is being done a lot more efficiently, and we cannot compete with AI on that level. Why? Because AI, robots, and so on, they're ready to work 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days in a year, subject to a little bit of just, if you like, just some sort of servicing. You don't even have to service intelligence, as it were, artificial intelligence. So that's it. So we need to begin to think about that. I think we're all being moved into a new era, and I think that our thinking has to also evolve to that level. Even when this gentleman spoke about the economic structure, I think it's also Mishaki spoke about economic structure that we run. The point is that from my position as an economist, I'm saying that the global economic system is broken down. And I wrote an article about that. It's in Premium Times, I think the cable as well, recently. That's why you see the riots in Kenya, but not only in Kenya, as far as Pakistan. And in Europe, people are just waiting, because we've seen a scenario where the wealth of the top tech companies, the Googles of this world, the Alphabet, the Facebook, Microsoft, they have actually doubled and tripled their net worth since 2020. That should concern us in 4 years. Some of them have tripled. That means that global wealth is going in one direction, and that human beings, the rest of us that are looking for jobs, we're getting the short end of the stick. According to Thomas Piketty, he wrote his book in 2011, thereabout, titled Capitalism in the 21st Century. That when he looked at the data over 200 years, we find out that the reward for capital has gone up stratospherically, whereas the reward for labor has plateaued, even is dropping. So it's everyone's concern. 8 billion people in the world, maybe 6 billion of those who can work, should be working. We all should be worried. So our thinking about some of these things should begin to change. So very quickly, I'll just say, Dr. Muda is worried about the revenue of Nigeria and all that. I think that he said that we may not be able to. I don't see why we can't make it, because, again, mind you, the Naira is what, maybe 40 kobo last year. Okay? So, I mean, we've devalued, meaning that everybody has also added, everybody who's producing something has added to their prices. That's why inflation is where it is. So I'm of the opinion we should be aggressive in going after our revenue and ensuring, in fact, there's no reason why we shouldn't double the numbers that we had last year. And I think that that's what we're looking at, I'll just talk about two more things and then I'll be gone. Very sorry, Faith. So, but when you spoke about debt, the fact that, the debt seems to be choking, let me say this very clearly. No serious nation wastes so much time talking about how to repay debt. Even companies, Dangote is not thinking about how to repay his debt. He's thinking about how to increase his turnover so that he can surmount that and expand this business. So a country we are concerned with how do we expand our GDP. The discussion about expanding GDP has not been had as much as it should. And so, for example, now the MBS is thinking about rebasing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pastor.
Yeah, so just a second. We're going to go back to maybe number one and number two. But I just want to land on that the issue is not about debt being too much. The issue is, are we growing? If we're not growing, we should be worried. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fasro. I know that you have a lot to say, but we are a bit, pressed for time. So we're going to move on very quickly. And I'm going to be talking with Mrs. Hawa Mustafa here, drawing on your experience, basically, of working with labor unions and civil service, still talking about the issue of the minimum minimum wage. You know, the labor is currently in talks with the federal government, the TUC, the NLC. They are, you know, insisting on a 250,000 naira minimum wage, and they're talking about this being a living wage, actually. But can the government afford this? We know that of all the state governments, about 14 state governments could not even afford to pay the 30,000 naira minimum wage. And we know that Zamfara just said they were going to implement it a couple of months ago. The organized private sector is insisting on paying 62,000 naira because they're saying that by the time you put everything together and look at what, you know, the economy is saying and the draw on the resources that they have, this is what they can afford. NECA has released a very strong statement on that. So let me talk to you, Mrs. Hawa, you know, on this. Can the government really afford this by the time you look at all of the data on the table and also looking at the private sector and what they have to deal with? Do you think that this is feasible? Hello, Mrs. Hawa, are you there? You might have to unmute so we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I was trying to unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Can
yes,
you hear
absolutely.
me?
Go right ahead. Yes, we can hear you. Go on.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I also want to join my other colleagues in appreciating the organizers of this very important discussion. To go to your question, first of all, I must say with a lot of emphasis and a strong sense of responsibility that indeed the government is capable with enough resources that this country is endowed to pay even much more than 250,000 naira. The 250,000 naira that we're talking about is less than $200 per month. For goodness sake. And I want to, you know, align this with the way policies, you know, are designed and implemented in this country. We design policies, economic policies, and target growth, but it is usually a growth that is slanted towards a few, and the majority usually are, you know, do not get the positive, you know, outcome or consequences, or bear most of the negative consequences of the kind of growth that we're implementing in this country. Can you hear me? A lot of echo.
Yes, we can hear you. Go on.
Okay. I think my other phone. So this is a country that, if you look at the economic statistics in this country, very recently, about I think sometime in 2019, Oxfam came out with a very robust, you know, study where it talked about the inequality in this country. Today, we have about less than 3% of the total population of this country owning at least 90%, between 85 to 90% of the total wealth. And each time our economic policies are churned out, the policy creates more wealth. At the same thing needs to do is to find a way to balance the creation of wealth and the distribution of the wealth. And I think this is where we are failing in our policy. If our policy is only looking at creation of wealth and not balancing this with how the wealth is distributed, then we continue to look at one side and blame the other side or victimize the other side for not understanding what government is targeting policies for reform policy. Some of the issues that had been talked about earlier achieved. What has been the focus of this government in the last 1 year, i.e. tax reform? When the government traditionally talks about tax reform, it is about how to increase VAT. It is about how to increase income tax. Oftentimes, the worker is targeted. There is no time we talk about tax reform that the worker does not, or the worker is found wanting. The worker tax is automatically taken at source. And what is the totality of the workers' tax? Even the informal sector, the petty tax in our markets, we call in terms of tax reform, is the area where we have leakages. We are in hundreds of millions of naira we lose. Our tax reform hardly focuses in that direction. And if we effectively focus on the areas of leakages, if we plug those leakages, even if we successfully plug leakages by 50 to 60%, I can assure you that the government will be able. When Labour says and insists on this, Labour does not just come blindly without making its own homework to say that this is what we want as living minimum wage. It is that I can assure you Labour will have done a lot of, assessment. Labour will have looked at our economic policies. How are we generating the wealth? Where is the wealth going to? Why are we having leakages? Who is benefiting from the leakages? Why do we talk so much about corruption and we focus on the civil service? What's the Orosanye report or policy come to the rescue? What about the areas where there is huge corruption, including corporate corruption, even in the private sector, aided by politicians? What about those areas? What about the area of making our policy? Because sometimes, look, it's not so much about the income. It is also that what about looking at policies that also help people, even in the informal sector, to the 250,000 naira that the workers have failed. Why should the workers have resources on transportation, for instance? Because the transportation sector is not functioning.
Mrs. Hawa, let me quickly direct this question.
Why should the worker pay so much for health services in health infrastructure that is accessing health problems? So this is it. So when the worker says we need this money, don't look at it in quantum. Don't look at it in terms of figure. 250,000 naira is huge. It's not huge. Break it down. What is the worker expected to spend it on in a situation where food inflation is hovering close to 40%? How do you say half of this income, is it sufficient to take care of feeding, to take care of children's education, to take care of transportation? At the same country, how much do we expend when we talk about?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hawa.
Super highways.
Mrs. Hawa Mustafa, thank you so much. Yes. Thank you. Because of
productive expenditure that does not translate into real development for the people and for the workers.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I know you have a lot to say, and I honestly wish we had time to take all of it. I was going to ask you about, the implication on inflation as well, but maybe we'll come back to that if there is time, so that I can quickly move on to, the issue of, talking about student loans and all of that. I'm going to direct this to Professor Ogunlano Olarewaju Fatai. We see that the government has increased tuition across multiple institutions. Of course, we're seeing protests, from students in universities talking about the increase in, tuition. And then we now, of course, know that there's a student loan issue that is on the table. Nelfon is talking about bringing in more institutions, right? But let's talk about the importance of the Student Loan Act in itself. Do you think that this is working overall? That is the issue of the student loan, especially for students in all of the tertiary institutions, that we have.
Yeah, thank you so much, moderator. Now, if you look at the issue of student loan, it's a function of government revenue inflow. And if you look at it from this perspective, government spending these days can no longer sustain educational funding based on the increasing nature of complex flow of government revenue. Again, government revenue, it has been drastically constrained by crude oil revenue sales, which have not been positive enough due to international fluctuations in the petroleum prices, and also due to mismanagement and corruption within the economy. Again, if you look at the monolithic product itself, it cannot generate enough revenue to sustain domestic financial resources as well as the student loans. There are kind of loopholes in government finances, and there are gaps between revenue inflow as well as the expenditure. Now, there is monumental corruption, which has constrained financial stock. Now, as such, government cannot muster enough financial resources in order to sustain educational development. Again, loan scheme by the government to indigent students in the university is a laudable program, is a good objective. But how would the government finance it? Will it be sustainable? Will it be persistent and consistent? Will it not be selective? As I've said earlier, loan scheme is practically a function of our sustainable revenue inflow. If you look at it prospectively from the dictates of what is happening in this country, officials of government, they commit financial resources to areas that are not beneficial to the growth of the economy, but rather on corruption-prone projects that would not yield any positive result to the government. And there is an implication to this. If we have large numbers of students out of the university, it has an implication on the nation. There will be high rate of dropouts, increase in crime rates, shortage of manpower skills needed in order to finance progressive development. It's a food for thought for the government. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that succinct response, Professor. Let's move on to Dr. Muda Yusuf. Like I said, we're pressed for time, so we're trying to move very, very fast. Let's talk about, public finance reforms that a lot of people would have expected would have been implemented by now, looking at detailed budgets to help seek dollar budget support from international agencies such as the World Bank. We have the minimum wage there as well, to help cushion the effects of the removal of subsidy, or, well, right now, subsidies back. So whether it is partial removal or full removal, what additional public finance reforms should have been expected by now? And I'm directing this to Dr. Muda Yusuf very quickly.
Well, thank you very much. Well, there is very little to add to what I said earlier about public finance. First is to look at the structure of government spending. That is extremely very important. We need to put it down. Even though we have had the argument that the challenge we have is not an expenditure problem, it's a revenue problem. But I believe that we need to act on both sides. Just as I said earlier, there has been some great deal of efforts to reform the tax system, not only to streamline the taxes, but to optimize tax revenue and get more taxes leveraging on technology. And I'm sure that the government had gone very far with that. And of course, we need to also ensure that we create the right kind of environment for the economy itself to grow, because there's a correlation between economic performance, GDP growth, and government revenue. That's extremely very important. And at the heart of all of that is to ensure that you have stability in our foreign exchange markets. That is very critical. And here I must commend the Central Bank of Nigeria. At least in the last 6 weeks or so, we have seen some measure of stability. The volatility in the foreign exchange market had reduced. And I'm hoping that the CBN will also sustain that. And in order to also ensure stability in the forex environment, we need to step up the issue of import substitution. That's extremely very important, because exchange rate is a price, and the fundamentals that drive any price is a supply and demand fundamentals. In order to ease the pressure of demand on forex, we need to accelerate import substitution. And one of the best ways to do that is to see what we can do very quickly with refining of petroleum products domestically, because close to 30% of our forex demand is coming from the demand importation of petroleum products. So we need to ensure that the Port Harcourt refinery, the Dangote refinery, and other initiatives that are in the works are encouraged to come up very, very quickly. That's very important. It's also important that we fast track the whole concept of backward integration. Our manufacturing sector is too import dependent. The government may need to do some heavy lifting to develop some core industries so that many of these manufacturers can source their raw materials domestically so that we can grow the economy and grow revenue. It's also important to look at export opportunities. One of the opportunities we have when we have a weak currency is opportunities in the export environment. And we are beginning to see some traction, but you can do a lot more by encouraging a lot more exports, by removing barriers, bureaucratic barriers, issues of procedures, issues at the ports and all of that. That will help. And of course, oil outputs. Government have been doing a lot around increasing oil output and all of that. But again, we are not where we should be. So we need to do a lot more in that space. We need to encourage more investment in gas sector. Again, I must commend the government. Recently, there was a lot of incentives given to those who are investing in gas, because actually we have more opportunities in gas even than in crude oil. So that, of course, is a welcome development, and we need to do a lot more of creating more incentives to support investors in that space. And we also need to ensure that we bring confidence back to the forex markets. And one of the ways to bring confidence back is to ensure stability. Yes, we want the exchange rate to appreciate, but that's a much bigger fundamental issue, which is driven by the fundamentals of supply to a large extent. But in the meantime, you should have a framework to ensure stability so that this challenge of speculative attack on the currency will be minimized. So those are the things I think we need to do. Fundamentally, we need to grow the economy in order to be able to grow revenue, and we need to also watch our expenditure. I think it's extremely very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olmudia Yusuf, for your contribution on that. We know that in recent times, the World Bank recently approved this $2.5 billion for Nigeria, subject to certain conditions. But we also know that one of the biggest challenges we have had so far is attracting FDIs and actually even retaining the ones that we have before, because we have had, several multinationals leave, in recent times. So I'll direct this to Mr. Olusegun Zaccheaus, really, this question. Nigeria has had problems attracting, significant capital inflows and FDIs. What is your perspective, and how the federal government has performed thus far when we talk about attracting large dollar inflows and, of course, FDIs? This is directed to Mr. Olusegun Zaccheaus.
Thanks a lot for that excellent question. A couple of points to note, right? Some of these things don't happen by magic. They take time. You build confidence of the investor. And with that, they begin to bring in the inflow. And some of the things you can see lately is some of the revision in our credit outlook by some of those global rating agencies, which is showing that, look, there's a bit more positive sentiment, about Nigeria economy. But if you ask me for an FDI holder, well, what are the quick criteria for me to make an investment in an economy? One key important point, money out, right, at a predictable price in the future, right? I'm not saying at a low or high price, right? And I think going back to what Dr. Moda said, I think creating a predictability and stability in the FX environment is really critical to attract this FDI. So I would say the government is doing all the right things for me, from my point of view, to begin to attract this. But this takes time. And I guess as I also speak to investors, one of the things you want to see is the consistency of this policy, right? Because what you don't want to see is policy being reversed, after 6 or 9 months, right? And I'm a bit optimistic that in few months to come, you begin to see a lot of activities. As a consultant, and I can tell you there are a lot of activities going on. And there are people starting refinery, there are people starting different businesses. And we're seeing, that interest in foreign capital coming into Nigeria. So I would say a good job has been done so far. Still a lot needs to be done going forward. But let me just make a very quick point to align my point. I think one of the things we must understand as a nation is that there are trade-offs that policy authority has to deal with, right? And there's a sequence of policy that needs to happen. You can't overinvest in long-term growth if you don't solve the issue of stability in the short term. And solving the issue of stability can mean lower growth. If you have high inflation, the approach of monetary policy is to slow down the economy, which will result in slower growth. When you have better stability, you get economic activity picks up again. So I think for me, one of the things the government can do is building a bit more clarity about the journey. Where are we today? Where are we going in 1 year? Where are we going to be in 3 years? What are the challenges we're going to face? I think it's pertinent that government spend a bit of time telling the story as they say, so that the expectations can be better managed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olusegun Zaccheaus, for that contribution, talking about trying to make sure there are no flip-flops in policy and sustaining it so that, investors have a certainty when they come into the country. I'm going to go on now to Dr. Olusegun Ogunmesaki, and we will be looking at what is going on with fiscal policies and, of course, monetary policies. We have seen the CBN in recent times roll out different policies. The CBN has been proactive. That's what a lot of people have said. Commentators have had that particular perspective. And we have the interest rates going up. CBN talking about that is its monetary toolkit and it has to keep using it. But the MPC always also tells us about how, well, we need the fiscal, policies to balance this because there's only so much monetary policies can achieve. So asking you this question directly, what is your perspective on the CBN's actions? And what should be expected, when you're talking about other participants of the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Trade and Investment, Ministry of Agriculture, that's talking about the role of the fiscal policies as well. First, your take on the CBN action so far, and what is expected on the fiscal side, Dr. Olusegun Ogunmesaki.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think it's pretty clear that everyone can agree to the fact that we have better monetary policy management, better clarity, and that's as a result of the fact that CBN or monetary policy is not just one of those, CBN, as it were, is not just one of those sectors. This is or ministries. This is a sector or a ministry that its efficiency will determine the direction of the economy. So you may not really expect more from some other ministries compared to what you have in terms of the monetary policy and the fiscal policy, of course. But I think just like Mr. Segun also referenced, we have to be very careful about how we want to achieve everything. Want to have better economic outcome in the short term, especially when we are in the state of emergency. We are pretty much in the state of emergency, not at least for now, but I think for some years. So my belief is that, yes, the CBN has been doing fantastically well in terms of listening to people, listening to business leaders and understanding how to manage the current situation. And I just hope that they will continue in that space. I also believe that the other ministry, especially the Ministry of Finance and the other key ministries, are learning from this. You may not, of course, expect huge fiscal changes, because in that space, it boils down to how you are able to change your capacity to earn, to attract investments, to produce more, and to do a lot of things. So that takes time. That for me looks like a long-term impact or outcome, aside the fact that you can quickly increase your revenue from taxing people, which may not be the best in this period. So, but apart from that, I think my advice really for the government is that it's good for us to look at it, and the people also. Let me say my advice to the people is that it's good for us to look at the short-term policy implementations and benefits, but we must also look critically to say, if we are to play the game of short-term, we'll keep playing that game, and that there may not be any benefit for the country on the long term. So I think the government is trying to do the best it will do, given the limited resources, especially in the space of clearing monetary and other policy space that we've experienced that have been highly bastardized for some years now. So, but I would also want to speak to the fact that whatever targets or objectives that we are setting as a nation, we should also be very careful as to the fact that this also need to go along what we have in our different plans. We have the MTNDP, the medium-term national development plan. We have the long-term plan. We have a series of objectives. We have targets, because I see people asking the question of what's the target of the government for growth, for inflation, and so many things. We need to be working with a view, with a long-term view, as to what we need to achieve. In the short term, yes, we are where we are, but I wish that we can begin to ask core questions that border on our competitiveness, on as a nation, our productivity, on the issues around informal economy, and then making sure that everything lies within the areas of macroeconomic stability. It's been said earlier that we cannot achieve any even long-term plan or see clearly when we don't have a relative stability in the short term. So, and I think the government is doing that. We need to improve more efforts into making sure that we arrest the inflation. It is understood that, yes, inflation and interest rates are more or less like trade-offs. And theoretically, we can say that businesses or private sectors will be more negatively affected with inflation, higher inflation, than what you have if you reduce the interest rate down. So I think the government, the monetary authority should continue what they are doing at making sure that this inflation rate is really controlled. According to the CBN, I think they are looking at having 22% growth, inflation rate by the end of the year. But that may look so ambitious, but it's pretty important for them to look at targeting inflation as we have. So everything should be, while we maintain our focus, policy focus on stabilizing the economy and the macro indicators, we also need to look at consolidation. So you have the stability, we need to consolidate this within the time frame, which looks like more or less a medium term outcomes. And then the long term, which is acceleration. We need to have a long-term vision for the country, and we need to work with that. It might not be easy in the short term, but if we want to always get everything in the short term, we may lose out on the ultimate goal of the country. And I will end with that.
Thank you so much. Dr. Segun, definitely a lot of plans going on for the long term. And like you said, at the end of the day, it is very ambitious that the CBN has this goal for 22% inflation rate for the end of the year. Hopefully, they're able to achieve that. So with this, I'll hand it over to Ladi to go on to the very next session as we continue this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Faith. Very interesting session there. It's time to move things quickly as possible. Time for a reality check. Right now, we're going to be evaluating the impact of policy so far The question is, are the policies weak, or do we need to give these policies more time? I still have Ms. Hawa Mustafa. I'll be coming to you first now. We see the monetary policy side working hard to tame inflation with rate hikes, interventions in the forex market. We saw one, I think, on Friday this week, but we still see weakness with the Naira, even though we see stability. Inflation is still high. From your viewpoint and that of SMEs, why is it that these macroeconomic trends have not yet displayed positive signs at this point? Ms. Mustafa, you have the floor. Hello, Ms. Hawa Mustafa, can you hear me? Are you there?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think if there's one thing Nigeria, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Fantastic, I can hear you. You can go on.
Okay, so one of the things I think Nigeria is, one thing that I think Nigeria is very, and of course, laws. However, one thing it is the process of implementation. We have certain expectations, usually positive expectations, because nobody draws up a policy towards a negative outcome. However, the very fundamental and important issue that should underline, the policy implementation process, which is not put into consideration oftentimes, is the underlying and historical socio-economic environment over which these policies are expected to operate. I give you an instance. Removal of subsidy, for instance. In an economy where, unfortunately for us, even in this 21st century, in terms of consumption and production, is about 85% of the population is living in poverty. In a situation where productivity is extremely low, in a situation where consumption, population, and our per capita income is still also very, very weak, subsidy has a serious ripple effect on the macro and micro economy. And when you do this without creating an enabling policy or program that sucks the shock, the expected shock, and you go about a policy implementation as if everything is normal, that is part of the problems we have. Such a policy is not going to have the desirable positive, a lot of negative impact you talk about. And that is why when there also does not seem to connect with the people which policy, is also targeting. And I think these are fundamental issues. So for me, in moving forward, for our policies part, it is important that these policies connect with the people, not just in terms of where are the people. It has to be holistically inclusive across horizontally and vertically.
All right.
Horizontal, properly inclusive, holistically inclusive, because people are we need to understand the socio-ecological locations of the people, the gender of the people, the different income levels, the different structure or location of the people, and see how differentiated impact that these policies are made of, so that the solution is also different characteristics of people that these policies are also meant to target.
Okay, I definitely Thank you so much, even though we had some distortions there, but thank you so much for your contributions, Mr. Hawa Mustafa. I'll take it on to Mr. Abdul Rauf Aliyu. Let's try to make our responses as concise as possible because of time. So recently I asked on social media, is there any good or service that hasn't gone up in price? Recently, and no one could give me something. I don't know if anybody can give me something here, but is there any hope in sight for Nigeria's cost of living challenges at this time? This for Mr. Abdul Rauf Aliyu.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Mr. Williams, for the good moderation so far. I think a lot have been said, and I think it's one of those things when you answer your questions last, everything will have been said, so you have nothing to say, just to recap. But I will want to make it known that, as you said, there's nothing that has not increased in price, whether it is food, transportation. A lot of presenters before me have spoken around the reforms that have taken place and the impact it has had. The trade-offs, again, it has had, and what we need to do going forward. I just wanted to add one or two things, and I think I will be speaking from a political risk perspective, looking at what those reforms are not things we can step back, even though we made mistakes of not doing what we call sequencing. It is not the software subsidy itself that was bad, but it was the floating and the subsidy who came almost at the same time, and so they were, they had repercussion efforts. The economy had not absorbed the shock from one, and then the other one came, and so it would take a lot of time, a lot of intervention. And again, one of the things I've always said was that, again, when this present government set up to do these policies, yes, they had good intentions, but I always tell people it wasn't strategic, it wasn't deliberate, and it wasn't intentional. In the fact that we are now reacting to certain challenges that was thrown up, rather than having, we have these deliberate things we wanted to do. This economic emergency thing of certain food that the government is trying to import, and several other things where things we would have foreseen, and if you had proper scenarios. But for me, let me quickly run around. I think I'll just try to see, okay, given all these things are happening, what will businesses and households really be doing in the coming days and months? Which for me, I think it's pretty much important. And so I think governments will see a lot of businesses try. I would advise governments to do a lot of costs optimization. They will need to prioritize the operational efficiency by reviewing their processes. They will need to renegotiate their contracts. It is credit contracts that we had, supply chain issues, because these things are discretionary and might affect. And so they also need to leverage technology as much as possible to bring down costs, so they can be able to streamline operations and bring down costs. And then one other critical thing businesses must do is that businesses must engage in diversification. Two types of diversification: either they diversify in more products, or they do geographical diversification. Try to see if they can move into other countries so that it will hedge against the risk of forex. Probably if it's possible for you to diversify into other geographies and also go into other products. We've seen one or two companies who have done that. And then I think the next thing I think I always advise companies to do is also to look around price management, which is also very critical. You also understand that you want to sell, but again, you also need to look at the disposable income of the people who are buying. And then people need to prioritize. There are certain things people don't buy anymore. And so you need to look at how you manage price. And one of the things we're looking at, most people, so we talk about inflation, and then we'll forget what other things that's also happened in Nigeria over the last 12 months. We're also battling with shrinkflation and skimflation. What I'm saying is that the prices have increased, while the product have shrinked, and the quality has dropped. And so people are going to spend, so you're buying something you buy for 100 naira, you're now buying for 300 naira at a lower quantity, at a lower price, and at a lower quality. These are other things, again, that I think the government also needs to intervene and going forward, because if this continues, you will find customers, a lot of consumers, household who also draw back in what they consume, and then it will affect the businesses, again, which will also impact on the revenue. And so and the final, the third aspect, again, is actually around risk management. We need to see governments, a lot of businesses putting in place a lot of robust risk management strategies, hedging against currencies, fluctuation. Yeah, currency has been a bit stable, and because we had a lot of inflows into we have a lot of inflows, as you know, from portfolio investors. Again, this is okay, but again, you need to face unforeseen shocks. And then finally, for businesses, you also need to do a lot of engagement and advocacy around government. I'm happy that we have the likes of NSSG here, represented by Dr. Olusegun, and we have Dr. Buddha here. There's a lot of engagements that need to continue to happen around issues around tax incentives, which I think is already going on, around investment, regulatory reforms need to happen. This will enhance the competitiveness that Dr. Olusegun was talking about, and then we can create a favorable operating environment in the long run. So let businesses be able, businesses have that that assurance from government that, look, you need to go through a lot of pain, but again, there's a long time, there's a hope at the horizon. Because if you do not put that hope horizon, and then businesses don't understand where they're going to, it's going to be a bigger challenge. So in as much as we want to have, and so that's why we need to have those, what are those short-term challenges we need to face off? What are the trade-offs we need to make today in order for us to benefit? And then for the individuals and households, I think one of the first things individuals need to do is go back to their budgeting and financial planning, which is also very critical. And then we need to invest a lot in skills application so that we can enhance our employability. Again, Dr. Fashola talked about AI taking over jobs. And so we need to reskill ourselves. Irrespective of what kind of job you do, whether it's in civil service, but you need to reskill. You need to make yourself more competitive and more employable, and so they can take opportunities. For me, I don't think AI will take anybody's job. It's just around how we evolve into the AI world and be able to, because I tell people, the machines are still machines. That's why I call artificial intelligence. If human beings have the nature, even if machines pull out all the data, it's you who actually make, at the end of the day, who take decisions based on intuitions and because the machine do not understand the socioeconomic circumstances of whatever policy decision he might chunk out. So that's one of it. And then we need to have alternative income. So most of us, just like businesses will diversify, individuals also need to diversify. And then finally, we need to have, for individuals, we need community support this time. We need to support one another. It's very, very critical that we support. And then whatever income you earn, and savings and investment, it's time for you when your younger ones call you. Because if you don't do that, you are prone to have more insecurity. You're prone to have people jobless, and then they'll come for us. And so we need, as much as possible, to forget about that. This is time for investment and time for. So these are things we need to do. And so I don't want to go to other data. I think, but these are the on what individuals you're actually going through. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Ali. You're definitely promoting natural intelligence there, even though we see AI being talked about so much. Thank you, you both for your contributions. I'm going to hand things over now to Faith, see how we can move this as quickly as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ladi. We are really pressed for time. The conversation is interesting, but we need to, hasten it right now. And so I'm going to just speak a few issues to talk about. And I want to get to Dr. Messi Bello Abu on this one. Let's talk about SMEs and how they're struggling in the light of the policies that the government has put forward so far. We've heard about, the issues of dealing with inflation, dealing with infrastructure deficits, and, electricity tariff being increased. There's so much going on, and SMEs are struggling. Over 800 companies shut down in the last 1 year. So I want to get your thoughts on this and what you actually think SMEs can do to survive in times, the opportunities and the challenges that are involved.
Thank you so much for this. I appreciate Nairametrics for having me, and it's such an honor to be on this platform. Great discourse so far. I appreciate every panelist here. Yes, what you just discussed is on MSME. And you will agree with me that this is the bedrock of the Nigeria economy, with 90% of businesses worldwide, they are all under MSME. And the statistics, they are staggering. 50% of global employment and the 40% of global GDP are generated by the MSME. So now, definitely that they are affected because of the economic situation. Just yesterday, 3 days now, been on a very strategic technical session with the Niger Delta stakeholders meeting, trying to look at how policies can be more favorable to not just the MSME, but the population at large. So it's quite a very appropriate question to be dealing with this morning. The Nigeria economic landscape is characterized definitely by high cost of living, inflation, and a volatile currency. So with a population of over 200 million and growing youth demography, so how can we present this opportunity? So Nigeria definitely presents opportunity for individuals to tap into alternative income stream. And I'll be looking at some of the statistics for us to have a more guided approach to this. The 63% of Nigeria, according to Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, are currently engaged in side hustle to supplement their income. Because we've listened to the discussion since morning, we've been talking about how the challenges, the opportunities. So it's my interest to note here that 63% of Nigerians are currently involved in side hustle. And what are these popular side hustle? What are these opportunities that we are looking at? In the statistics shows that food vending, 22%, event planning, 18%, and freelance writing and design, 15%. I just made mention of the stakeholders meeting, yes, we've had in Rivers State. And it will interest you to know that almost 250 million was budgeted for that event. And as I sat there as a consultant, as a management consultant, I was looking at the facts and figures. And I said, for everyone that was part of this event, definitely is going home with a minimum of maybe 5M for everyone that was involved. There was a lot of value chain in terms of, and you will agree with me that the bulk of that money definitely must have gone to food in terms of refreshment. So there's a lot to be done for us as MSME if we pay attention to the trends. That is why I'm giving us these statistics. And also another area, one of our speakers talked about AI, the digital space, which is quite profound right now. So the digital space is another space that we can look at as MSME to be able to have alternative means of income. Nigerians have we have over 100 million internet users, over 100 million internet users, which presents opportunities for digital income stream, that is digital income stream, such as that is the source from Nigeria Communication Commission. And popular among these digital income streams include online tutoring, affiliate marketing, and e-commerce sales. So also we are looking at remote jobs. We know we are high on remote job right now. Absolute alternative means of streams of income is so pivotal right now. The remote job, it will interest us to know that 42% of Nigeria professionals work remotely at least once in a week. And this is the source from remote.com. So they're also saying that these are also alternative means of income. So what are we advocating? Look at your environment. We've established that 90% of businesses worldwide is MSME, and it's the part of the GDP. They make up the GDP of any global economy. So popular among some of these are remote jobs, because I'm profiling solution. Popular among them is opportunities include the software development, which we know is very critical. Then the customer service, which is 20%. Software development, the statistics show that 30% of those that are there, that is part of generating income. Customer service, you can do this online, 20%. Then data analysis, 20%. So these are areas that we can get involved in alternative means of income that will help to ameliorate the current situation. But one thing that we are known for as a country is our grit, our resilience, and our ability to survive against all odds. So if we take the pain to look at areas that we can definitely be part of, I can assure you that just as the economy is struggling, we have a lot of people that are still making it. So look at the alternative means of income. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mercy. I like the fact that you are preferring solutions and saying, in spite of everything, we can find a way through this. And indeed, Nigerians are known for the resilience and their grit. Because of time, I would just want to, bring in Dr. Tope Fashion very quickly. to give us a final commentary on the outlook for the economy, for the last quarter of the year, okay, from the committees that have been set up so far, livestock committee and, economic committees. What can we look forward to? And, what are the short-term and long-term goals of these committees?
Well, thank you very much once more. Very quickly, I want to thank Dr. Mrs. Abu, who just spoke. She gave some very profound, and one thing I quickly want to bring out is that, the issue of minimum wage and all these things about employment goes beyond NLC. The NLC controls about 7 to 8% of working population in Nigeria. 88% of Nigerians work in unstructured environment, hustling, farming, doing all sorts. And the concern of the government is actually about that big number. Secondly, I want to say thank you to Segun Zakios for speaking about communication and telling the story. I actually will admit that that's been a bit of a drawback for us here. And lastly, for Ugo Dre mentioned inflation and interest rate. That's just orthodox thinking. I think that we have to understand that our economy is not quite orthodox, and we have to think for ourselves. So increasing the interest rate, even the World Bank had to admit a couple of days back that our increases in interest rate may not necessarily bring down inflation, because we're not just at that level. That's the problem with monetarism. Monetarism basically talks, I went back and studied monetarism, even as a special advisor that I am now. I realized that, look, monetarism presupposes that you have very, very good data for it to work. So central bank can do its work, but I think even the central bank understands that to some limit. I want to speak finally about, yes, a lot of the policies being made, a lot of the committees being set up. We expect that they will work. But if you ask me the question, which is on this paper, that is it renew hope or reality check? As somebody mentioned, there are some parts of the economy that are making it, and I'm sharing these slides now so that we can look at it. For example, look at the bank. This is the Fugas, right? And these guys, Access Bank, 335% increase in profit. First Bank, 325. I'm talking of just even over a period of months and even over a period of 1 year, 256% in UBA, and so on and so forth. That tells you that some part of the economy is making money. Okay, I did a short whatever to just look at it and see, that look, these sectors, creative arts. I understand that Rema is being paid $3 million just for singing at one party in India. Local manufacturing, the car manufacturers, they're beginning to get some business. And the other time I saw, Sin exported about 28 billion worth of cars to Sierra Leone, Naira, so infrastructure is also really coming up. Well, I live in Abuja here. Wike is performing wonders everywhere. Umar here is also known to be a performer. So because of the quantum of Naira we're getting as a result of devaluation of the Naira, we're seeing a bit more from that regard, from that area. Entertainment is making money. The hotels are more expensive. You can't get a booking. Who's paying for them? And local governments are now lucky to get. So essentially speaking, I just want to say that, some parts of the economy are still making money, but the challenge is for all of us. If you look at what is called the product space, this is everything a country can produce, and all the area, chemical, machinery, metal. This is where Nigeria is. Look at that. From this point to this point, there's work for everybody apart from the government. Of course, the government has to take responsibility at the end of the day. You know what I'm saying? So essentially speaking, there's stuff going on, but I also admit the fact that we are not, we need to do a lot more risk management of our policy. We need to be careful about premature load bearing and overload of reforms. No government can solve all the problems. We have to probably choose at some point. We have to be very careful about ideology and be much more pragmatic. We have to look at history, and we have to look at, the broken world economic system, like I said earlier. So anyway, let me stop here. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tokbe Fashua. And because we have had such a long session, it's now past 12. Thank you everyone for being part of it. I'll hand over to Joanna Mustafa, so that she can take it on from here.
All right, thank you so much for that, Faith. It has been a very, very, very interesting session. I can see a lot of engagements in the chat box. I can see the Q&A section as well. I'm sure there are a number of questions there, but our time is fast spent. I know some of the questions have been answered, but I'd like to entreat our panelists if they can attend to some of those questions while I give the closing remarks. That would be wonderful. But it's been a great session. So many things gained, right? Reality checks indeed. And of course, the need to align with those realities, right? We've had speakers highlight the need to reskill, right? To align with some of these realities. We've had speakers talk about going beyond just, wealth creation, but also the need to distribute that wealth that is being created equitably. And there's just so much that has been said, right? I can't even begin to go through it all, but remember, this session is recorded. The full conversation will be made available on YouTube, so you can always come back and go through it again. I just want to say a huge thank you to all our panelists who were able to make the most out of the limited time that we did have. You did an awesome job. And of course, we look forward to hearing more of your thoughts, right? In other thought leadership programs that we have. Remember, Nairametrics, we're always driving these conversations, tracking the economy, and how we're doing, providing financial insights across various platforms, right? We have this webinar quarterly. There's the Industry Outlook monthly, where we zero in on different industries, right? So sometimes it's agriculture, sometimes it's the FMCG, and so on and so forth. So, make sure that you follow Nairametrics across different platforms so that you know what is going on and you stay a part of the conversations. We have programs on radio. Monday is another time. Follow the Money with Godre. There's a podcast now daily. Follow the Money with Godre that you can also listen to and stay abreast with the capital market. There's so much to say, right? But I would say you should follow us on social media so that you're able to stay abreast with everything and all our thought leadership programs. Again, a huge thank you. I can't thank all our panelists enough. And a huge thank you to everybody. So many things you could have done with your Saturday morning, but you're here today. Shows your interest in the economy. Thank you so much for being a part of today's conversation, and hopefully you get to enjoy the rest of your Saturday and your weekend as well. Thanks once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.